So now we dive a little deeper, and we are joined by Sister Nula looking at community. So we're short on time, so we're going to get Sister to come on up.
So, good morning, everyone. This is an amazing event, and thank you for being here, and thank you for inviting me. And now I watch my time. So, we're going to talk about community. And in a sense, the progression that Oria just described should be kind of clear. In fact, we've just gone this morning from really in-depth you and Jesus, you and God, me and God, to now what we're going to talk about, which I see as we and God. All right? Community, an absolute element in the new evangelization. So at 5 o'clock this morning when I was revising this talk, I decided to ask initial questions following from yesterday's experience. First, what is it that our world needs us to witness about community? And I was very moved by Bob Britton's reflection on the general overview and the context in the world in which we find ourselves. So I want you to begin to think yourself of what community means in this world, because it is not any longer local, geographic community with similar sociocultural religious beliefs and shared values. It ain't that no more. Community now is my 625 friends on Facebook. It's being a Red Sox fan. The notion of community itself in our world is in question. Partly it's changing because of the changing demographics and communication. And one of our questions as Christians is, how much of that is for the good and can we use for the good, and how much of that might challenge our own understanding? Think about it. This is my really brilliant insight from 4:30 before I got out of bed to revise the talk at 5. If an alien from Mars followed you around for 1 week, including going to whatever church activities you'd attend and participating in Mass on Sunday, what God would the alien describe? If the alien knew nothing about classic texts, nothing about the history, the Judeo-Christian, nothing, and only learned who Jesus is, who God is through the revelation of Jesus Christ and the power of the Holy Spirit, what would the God look like? Because one of the foundational challenges personally and communally is that's the reality in our world. We're the lessons. There ain't no catechism out there that everybody else knew, and they're just rejecting it or misunderstanding it. We are the catechism. So, when I was given the objectives that the group had developed for this, there were 3 things, and as a teacher, I'll just mention what I want to try to do very rapidly. I talk fast, and because this should be an hour-and-a-half lecture, I'm really going to move. 3 objectives. To see if we could deepen a little bit, as part of this transformation experience, our understanding of Christian community. Second, to examine our lived reality with the gospel vision of community. Okay, this is an authenticity, and we're going to come to a credibility question that someone else is going to pursue tomorrow. And then third, to recognize and accept our personal and mutual responsibility for creating and fostering Christian communities in this time, the 21st century. So now, since we're visioning, I do want you to close your eyes. I'm a pediatrician by training. Close your eyes. Close your eyes. What image comes to mind when I ask you to think of Holy Communion? So if I look at this, I thought, maybe that's the image of Holy Communion. Bet some of you thought that one. How about an even more nostalgic? That one. Remember the days when there were tons of children, all in their little white dresses and their white suits with their little veils coming to Holy Communion? Did any of you, when I asked you to free associate Holy Communion, think this? Not on the altar, but in the body of the church. Did any of you think this? Not even in the church, but this is the parish leaders, those who in fact are on parish pastoral councils, those who lead the works that is done within the parish. Did any of you think of Holy Communion in these last two visions? Because I want you to understand that we say, every time we say the Apostles' Creed, which I far prefer to the Nicene, when I get a chance I say what I think. In the Apostles' Creed, we say, every time we say it, I believe in the communion of saints. Now, Irish Catholic, first generation North American, I'm telling you, I believe in the communion of saints this way. I talk to my Nana and my mom and dad. They're still here with us, the communion of saints. But what I want us to reflect on now is what the Catechism actually says about this communion of saints, this way of being. I don't want us for a moment to be this way. I want us for a moment to be this way. The Catechism says some brilliant things. And the two things that we're going to reflect on very rapidly are the communion that the Catechism asks us to reflect on is first communion in holy things, and then communion among holy persons. If we take the theology of communio, which is a way of understanding the church, based and rooted in koinonia. See, I can do Latin too when I'm going to talk about kerygma. Where's the boy from yesterday? I picked up on this because this fits perfectly, just so you know we belong to the same church. Okay. This is crucial. We are not a me and God religion. We are a we and God religion. That does not diminish or dismiss in any way the importance of the personal encounter with Jesus Christ. But community is essential to Christian identity. And that's why, when in fact Eric was talking about kerygma, first point, we are created for relationships. The Trinity, with Jesus, among ourselves, relationships. So the Catechism then expresses, for deepened understanding about the faith, communion in each of these aspects. We're going to go through them very rapidly, but you need to understand, I had fun doing some of the theology background for this. It's communion in faith, communion of the sacraments, communion of charisms or gifts, holding everything in common, and communion in charity. So let's just rapidly, these are the elements that the Catechism says, if we're really understanding our notion of communion and community, are essential. Communion in faith. I want to say two things. One, what an amazing, incredible, powerful reality it is to have a group of people that have shared beliefs and have shared beliefs that give meaning to the most important issues in life. Many of you know I'm a retired pediatrician, did pediatric hematology oncology and pediatric end-of-life care. I then went on to do end-of-life care from the ethics perspective. How people lose loved ones without a sense of the resurrection of the body, the communion of the saints, the power of faith, I do not understand. So, our shared communion in faith gives us an enormous advantage. We are not people of no hope. We are not people who are lost amidst the problems of the world. But then I ask you to think of this. How much division is there among us about faith theology issues? How much about practices? He's conservative, he's liberal, he's Pentecostal, she's... Remember, the alien from Mars is looking at us and saying, what do I learn about this Jesus and God from these people? Communion of the sacraments. This is, again, absolutely kind of crucial to our understanding here. This is from Lumen Gentium, one of my favorite documents of the Second Vatican Council. The Church acts in the sacraments as an organically structured priestly community. We are not a social group. We have characteristics of social action and we need to function, but we are primarily a priestly community. And the common thing we share is the priesthood of the baptized. Then we make a distinction among ordained and lay. But the common baptism ordains us to the baptism of the whole faithful. The third aspect of communion is a communion of charisms. Man, this is one we really misunderstand. We really have a very bad history on this one, all right? And you'll see in a moment why my work in clergy abuse makes these things so important for me. From Corinthians, I love this. Now there are a variety of gifts, but the same Spirit, and there are varieties of service, but the same Lord, and there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who activates all of them in everyone. To each is given the manifestation of the Holy Spirit for the common good. Common good. Do you want to reflect, any of you who are looking at American politics, I'm a born American, I'm a Canadian by adoption, about the notion of the common good in the 21st century? Excuse me, do you want to look at Ottawa right now? Don't stand there gloating over the disastrous social situation and sense of common good and common justice in the States, because we're almost as bad, all right? The point I want to make here is not only do we have to commit to the common good, but this is not optional. Catholics act as if it's optional. Oh, I think I'll volunteer for that committee. I have a little extra time now that the children have gone away. We have never accepted the church is not fully the church unless every one of us is contributing whatever our gift is. And some of them are big gifts, like preaching and teaching. And some of them are crucially important but smaller, like visiting the sick, bringing communion to the dying, hospitality. So, communion of charisms, what do you think we look like when people reflect on that notion? We hold all things in common. Ha, ha, ha. Now remember, I'm a Roman Catholic religious and I was a doctor for 34 years. You want to know how much I earned? You want to know how much I own? I don't expect you to have a vow of poverty. That's a particular charism and a gift. It was given to me. And I knew it when I was 12, and I've lived out of it my whole life. But as Christians, the question is, what do we model in community about the preferential option for the poor, the stewardship of goods and gifts, the resistance to materialism and commodification? Don't you love this Pope? I mean, this is someone who's standing up there saying, not just by his words, but by his, he's not putting this on. He has lived this way. And he says, what impresses me about a priest? Well, it's not having the fanciest car on the lot. How many of us, okay? We just redid our kitchens. We wanted Carrara marble for the counter, okay? Young couples today on these shows buying houses. Oh, no. We want an ensuite. That walk-in shower is not big enough. The first house. We, in fact, have to ask ourselves in what way we, not living in the vow of poverty, but how do we resist materialism and commodification and commit to the common good? Now, the last point, the communion of charity. This is probably the most important and the toughest one. All of these other aspects of communion are ones that I don't think we think about, which is why I got them from the Catechism and thought I'd put them out there. Do you think anyone in downtown Halifax would say of the people of St. Agnes Parish, where's Father John? You got a great parish, Father. I'm just using you as the example. I could use the cathedral, and then we'd have both the bishop and we'd have Father Tom up on the mat. This is the question. Do you think people in this area of the city, in downtown Halifax, think of St. Agnes and say, oh, how they love one another? You see, I'm a teacher, right, with a little flair for the dramatic. But these are dead serious questions. These are dead serious questions. Because if what we believe and our relationship to God, who our God is, if it doesn't flow into how we are with each other and with our world, what is it that we're doing? We'll see when we talk about credible witnesses, this is where the rubber hits the road. Because if it doesn't look like we're joyful, if it doesn't look like we look and act for justice, if it doesn't look like we are compassionate and act for the poor, if it doesn't look like we are, in fact, forgiving, and what is it? So we're saying this stuff, and we're in total contradiction, okay? Believe what I say and not what I do, or however that. So the communion of charity then raises, I think, serious questions about relationships, and now you're going to see where my lessons from the abuse crisis will come in. My new BFF, Pope Francis and Lumen Fidei, all right? Persons always live in relationship. We come from others, we belong to others, and our lives are enlarged by our encounter with others. Even our own self-knowledge, our knowledge and self-awareness are relational. They are linked with others who've gone before us. In the first place, our parents who gave us life and our name, and then through the rest of our lives, all the other people that we come in contact with. What are the obligations of relationship in a community that sees itself following Jesus Christ? Well, I want to just briefly say there are at least 3 aspects that I think we need lots more work on. And as we progress in our local church with transformation, I think as we go deeper into every element, these are the ones I just identify under in communion in charity. There are issues of power and authority in our church. There are issues of communication and dialogue in our church. And there are issues of care and support for each other in our church. For too long, and Bob Britton set this up beautifully in what happened when instead of personal conversion to Jesus Christ in a time of persecution, the whole world was, the whole world was baptized, and it became a sociocultural reality, right? And from that, whatever happened in building up a big organization, because now it had thousands and thousands and thousands of members, we began to think of the church as societas perfectae, the perfect society, not a pilgrim church, not a church of sinners. Are any of you among the group who were appalled that Pope Francis asked the question in the America interview, so who is Jorge Bergoglio? And he says, I am a sinner. I know some Catholics who are, what is he doing? He's the Pope. Somehow or other, the issue for us, if we are truly to get back to the understanding of the Lord, is to begin to understand that as we became a big church and had to function like an organization, that the foundational ways of relating in the community of Christ get distorted, okay? We have hierarchical, vertical accountability. Messages come down in our church, and accountability goes from priest to bishop to pope. There is no accountability, canonically, to any of us in the laity from our clergy. Think about that. Because what it does is, and we see this, Pope Francis, in naming the 3 great temptations of the church, talks about clericalism. Clericalism is inappropriate attention to the clerical. It's not about organization. I'm a doc, ran 2 children's hospitals. I know you need, the buck stops here, and you need division of responsibility. But when the institution and reputation becomes more important than the service, you've lost the call. And it does at least 2 things. Attention to keeping the institution looking good, not being good. 2 consequences for sure. It erodes the truly priestly for all, but especially for our priests and bishops. and it fosters lay passivity. After years and years and years and years of being told, listen, these are the guys that do the holy, these are the guys that do the work, listen to what they say, they have something to teach. Then we turn around with Vatican II, we're all responsible. Everybody goes, what? Why? Because we have no practices in our church of real dialogue and mutual responsibility. We take baby steps and then we back up again. We are in this together, right? So power is at play here, but again, from the Pope, certainly Jesus conferred power upon Peter. No one's going to argue with that. But what sort of power was it? Let us never forget that authentic power is service, and that the Pope, too, when exercising power, must enter more fully into that service. So, if we're really going to rethink relationships, this Pope is giving us huge, huge thoughts. Vatican II started to talk a little differently about communication, which is the second point, because I'm coming to the end here. And if you look at the Second Vatican Council, there were 4 kinds of terms that became new language in the Catholic Church. 1, collegiality among the bishops. 2, collaboration between bishops and theologians. 3, consultation between bishops and the laity, much like Archbishop Mancini is doing here. And 4, dialogue. But look what the dialogue was focused on. Dialogue with those outside the church. And even now with the new evangelization, some people polish up our beliefs, stand tall, and say the same things. Dialogue outside. We know, of course, that's not at all what the new evangelization is about. But if we look at relationships in the church, the community of the church, this is a reality, very clear. We have very few church practices of meaningful dialogue. In fact, Pope Francis has called us to develop a culture of dialogue because we don't have one. We know how to criticize each other. We know how to walk out of Mass and say, oh my God, his sermon was awful. His sermon was awful. Have no way of properly understanding how to support and assist and mutually kind of help each other to be the people that we're called to be. I'm fascinated by a book I'm reading on dialogue. I shared this with Archbishop Mancini. The first chapter, he talks about what's supposed to be the dialogue of liturgy, homily, and religious education. The liturgy is a dialogue. Would you ever know that from me? It is, right? The Lord be with you and with your spirit. Let's give thanks. Okay. Do you experience what's happening there as a dialogue? Hey, let's do the Baltimore Catechism. This is what I love. The pseudo-dialogue of the Baltimore Catechism. What was it? 222 questions and answers. This is dialogue. Memorize the questions and the answers, even if the questions haven't come to you yet. What I'm saying to you is, we have a long way to go as Catholics with knowing how to talk to each other honestly and with love. And then I'm coming to the final point. Big, big, big for me. And this is from Archbishop Mancini's wonderful Pentecostal pastoral letter. I keep telling the bishop I quote this all the time, so I think I now know that letter better than he does. The bishop calls us to build up those elements with strength and commitment in a relationship of mutuality in the community of the faith. Can you imagine what it would actually be like if we had far more real mutual love and support between ourselves as clergy and lay? And of course, this is exactly what Lumen Gentium says is the proper relationship. Okay, it's not to say that the ordained don't have distinct responsibilities and position, okay? But the distinctions which the Lord has made between sacred ministers and the rest of the people of God entails a unifying purpose, since pastors and the other faithful are bound to each other by mutual need. We've not thought that. We didn't think they needed us. And at times, they didn't think we didn't need them and they didn't need us, right? Except as observers. What we now know is that part of what we have failed to witness as a church is loving support across the church of all men and women ordained and lay, marginalized and mainstream. There's a huge set of challenges for Christian community. And so when I look at the question, what witness of community does our world today need? Some of the things I'll throw out for our reflection. Our world is profoundly, disrespectfully individualist. You want to look at the arguments about assisted suicide? Okay. The Charter of Values in Quebec? Okay. Yet at the same time, so many people are alienated. Look at adolescent suicide. Look at adolescent suicide. Our world experiences abuse of power at all times. Do I go back to the Senate again? Okay. Materialism and commodification is rampant. The average debt of the average Canadian is going up and up, filling our lives with things. How do we witness to a different understanding? There is an increasing gap in our world between the rich and the poor, yet we're called to be a people who commit to justice, compassion, and the common good. And then finally, does the violence wear you down so much that you just change the channel? Now it's Syria. So, okay, everybody's praying for Syria. God knows the people in Syria need our help. But what happened with sub-Saharan Africa? What's still going on in other aspects of the third world? We get tragedy, justice fatigue, and move on. So, community is a great thing. We're not in this alone, but I think we're also not being the community that Jesus has asked us to be, and that's what we're supposed to reflect on now. What are the challenges in our world? What do they need us to witness, and what do we have to do to be that credible witness?